Get ready for a night of timeless masterpieces as the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra presents Eroica. The evening welcomes guest violinist Luann Lee to perform Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. The concert closes with Beethoven's groundbreaking Symphony No. 3, Eroica. With its sweeping energy and bold sound, the symphony celebrates the triumph of the human spirit. Join the WCO on November 14th at 7:30 p.m. for Eroica. Tickets available at wcoconcerts.org/Eroica. Eroica. You know that one outlet you have that's obviously overloaded? Things to remember about November: there's less daylight, space heaters are coming out, holiday lights are going up, and that's an electrical stress test. For $149, Cardinal checks outlets, switches, circuits, panels, and delivers a report with plain English next steps, so you can host Thanksgiving without praying the breaker holds. Schedule now at cardinalservice.com or call 608-291-9551. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, it's no secret that finding affordable housing in Madison is, well, hard. And for students at UW, hunting for housing on and around campus that fits within their budgets can be a near impossible task. A podcast from the Rebecca M. Blank Center for Campus History is digging into the archives to explain how students across time have found housing and how the struggles of today really aren't all that different from decades past. With me to talk about it today is the director of the center and co-host of the Reorientation podcast, Casey Lucchini Butcher. What's up? Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again. It's so nice to be back on the pod.
Yeah. So, Casey, the last time you came on the show was to talk about season 1 of Reorientation last year, which was so good. Folks should definitely check that out. That was focused on the origins of campus police. Now y'all are back with season 2, a brand new season all about housing in Madison, specifically campus housing. Can we just start with why did you choose that focus?
Each season of the Reorientation podcast, we try and focus on one question. And usually this is an issue that is really important to campus or to the campus community. And we kept getting the question from people, why is it so hard to find housing? And as historians, we knew there was a history-based answer to that question. And so we decided, our question for the season is, all right, why is it so hard to find housing at UW-Madison? And where did that problem start? And what is still feeding into that problem? And what do solutions look like?
It's very exciting because we talk about it nonstop. It is such a pervasive issue in Madison. And so, of course, it's impacting campus. And to know that there are these through lines is just really fascinating. Without giving too much away, what are some of the themes from this season? Or give as much away as you want.
I know. I'm like, spoiler.
It's up to you.
It's always funny because I'm like, spoiler, alert, but it's history, so it did already happen.
For y'all uninitiated, spoiler. Yeah.
Spoiler, the history happened. I think one of the big themes for us and one of the most surprising findings was that this problem goes back further than most people think. So I think there's the idea that, it's all recent, right? Just recently, we aren't building enough housing. Just recently, Madison is growing, and that's where all of our housing problems are coming from. But the truth is that a lot of the housing issues for students today really date back to the mid-century, right after World War II. You have this huge boom of people going to college. Some of that's the GI Bill. Some of it is just a bigger investment in higher education and as a country. And that is really where a lot of these problems began. And it was almost a kind of situation where we got behind on it in the 1950s and we just never quite caught up. And it's been this compounding problem over the years that keeps adding and adding and adding. Not to, again, give away too much, but we really wanted to think about not only the historical kind of issues, both around, is there enough housing? But we also wanted to talk about housing discrimination, right? Who has easy access to housing? What type of housing? We also wanted to look at what happens when you don't have access to housing. We tried to look at what are different forms of housing on campus, not just dorms, not just private apartments. What about fraternity and sorority houses? What about living cooperatives? And then we close out the season with a kind of exploration of today, where we are now.
It's so wild because, I talked to the mayor, Satya Rhodes Conway, on the show about housing and the issues. And I remember her saying, a lot of people think that this is just a new issue, but, this is like a couple decades past. And you're saying this is 1950s, that when we got behind. Like, she used the exact same language. Like, we just kind of got behind the ball on the growth. And this is really something that goes back even further. Talk to a historian to find out, right?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because you think, okay, surely technology has gotten better, construction's gotten better, whatever, all these things have gotten better. But it is like you fall behind just a little bit and all of a sudden you're playing catch up. But more than that, I think, we're just talking about a different volume of people moving. Like even 1970 compared to 1990 compared to today, there's a different volume of students coming to the university. There's a different volume of people who want to live in the Madison area. It's just like all these problems kind of compound on one another. And that's how we get to this moment where, there seems to be problems everywhere.
Well, let's get a taste of the podcast. Here you are with your co-host, Alexandra Pascalone.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, I know. That's a rent hike of like 20%.
No, I mean 140 a month? What decade is this from?
Oh, did I not say? It's from 1969. Why do you think we added sound effects for an actual print newspaper?
But everything they were talking about
sounds basically the exact same as what experts were telling us in interviews for the podcast like last month.
These places are sometimes just really overpriced, sometimes just run by really lousy landlords who don't deal with health and safety issues.
These high rises just keep getting built. And so the lack of options to have that affordable housing just don't exist.
There's only so much housing to be had, which is just unfortunately a market supply and demand issue. And students are really feeling the pinch of that.
And rent is, for so many people, whether or not you're in college, just this major obstacle.
Everything old is new again, or whatever. I guess it could be kind of comforting to know that finding housing in Madison has always been a
Truly a great line in the season.
We decided to go there,
Yeah, it deserves. The rent is too damn high. It's truly all of the things. And this season is focused on student housing. And I'd love you to help us set the scene and stakes for those of us who are a few years removed from our college days, even though I was a Badger. What is the going rate for student housing these days on campus?
Yeah, so when we looked into it, we had this kind of jokes about, oh, the rent is getting high in 1969. It's $140. But it's so interesting that when you read out that article, you don't have any idea what year it's from. You say, wait, that's a problem that our students face today. So the city of Madison put out a report recently that showed that rents rose 47% from 2020 to 2025. And they were kind of studying this area around campus, a 2.5-mile area. And the average monthly rent in that area was around $1,300 per bed, not per apartment, per bed. And $1,300 was the average. So if a student wanted to live in a nicer place, I know, per bed. And the per bed distinction matters because a survey from UW-Madison found that 77% of students living off campus are sharing bedrooms. So they are splitting a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 or 4 people. And so that's the per bed price. There are some more affordable options. I'm putting affordable in huge air quotes, and those average about $986 a month. But that affordable option is coming with things like a less nice place to live, right? Maybe your landlord is not as responsive. Maybe you're not in as nice of a neighborhood. All those kinds of little things that really do affect how you feel about that house. And not to throw even more numbers in, but I do just want to say the Wisconsin minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. And, if you are a student who is working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, and even if you're making double the minimum wage, even if you get a job on campus that pays you $15 an hour, your salary is still not going to be enough to afford these apartments. And so when we say they are unaffordable, they are literally unaffordable.
It's wild thinking back to when I was a bachelor, so back in 2011, I think my first apartment was $500 with one other person, and it was a pretty nice one. And my next apartment was $300 with two people. So to hear $1,300 for a bed, that feels insane and also accurate when I've looked at housing recently and I've looked at places around campus, and it truly is feels like a different world.
Yeah, and to be sure, you can find cheaper apartments, but we kept talking about that this is like a matrix of choices. So if you want cheaper rent, you have to maybe live further from the university. You have to maybe have a less nice apartment, right? It feels like you're not given great options, and you have to kind of decide what you're willing to sacrifice if cheap rent is what you need, right? And to be sure that is also not a problem that every student has, right? Some students have the kind of means or the family means to pay these exorbitant rents, and they get to live on campus 2 minutes from their classes, and they're downtown where all the cool bars are, right? So it's this kind of matrix of choice that students have to juggle.
Imagine what it would be like to not be able to afford to put a meal on your table this Thanksgiving. Too many of our neighbors don't have to imagine. That's their reality. With rising food prices and cuts to food aid programs, food insecurity is a crisis in Madison. That's why Goodman Community Center runs the annual Thanksgiving Basket Drive. They're giving 4,000 families in our community all the groceries they need to cook a delicious Thanksgiving dinner at home. Everything from gravy, veggies, stuffing, dessert, and of course, the turkey. But they need our help to collect all the food and funds needed to fill all of those 4,000 baskets. If you can afford to do so, go to goodmancenter.org/Thanksgiving and learn how you can help. You can donate food, start a food drive, or donate funds. Together, we can ensure that thousands of our friends and neighbors have a joyful Thanksgiving.
You know, when most of us want to learn a new language, it's not because we're dying to memorize grammar tables or ace a quiz. It's because we actually want to speak it out in the real world with real people. And that's what Babbel is great at, getting you there fast. Hey, it's Michael Zibiak, Chief Revenue Officer here at CityCast. My daughter's a senior in high school, and after graduation, we're taking a father-daughter trip to Spain. And right now, my Spanish is, let's just say, very high school level. Shout out to Senior Patty from Syosset High School. You tried. When we're in Spain, I'd love to do more than just ask where the bathroom is. I want to be able to chat with locals, order tapas, and actually connect, not just read the menu and point. So I'm starting with Babbel. It's all about small steps, big wins, and it's super easy to fit into my life. Honestly, with how busy things get here at CityCast, I love that Babbel's bite-sized, 10-minute lessons fit right into my day, between meetings or over my morning coffee. I'm excited to pick up some real-world Spanish before we go, so we can experience Spain like locals, not tourists. Doesn't that sound better? Right now, Babbel's got a special deal for our listeners. Get up to 55% off your subscription at babbel.com/citycast. That's BABBEL.com/citycast for up to 55% off. Rules and restrictions may apply. Gracias and adios.
You know, we've obviously kind of set up just the fact that affordability has had a historical through line in your work in terms of issues that students face when it comes to finding housing. What other through lines have you seen around the housing issues?
One of the other through lines we've seen is that this is a pressing concern for students and for the Madison community. So whether it's 1960s, whether it's the 1980s, whether it's the early 2000s, students are very loud about this issue. They keep saying, rent is getting more expensive. We don't have enough options. There are not enough places to live. How are we supposed to come to this university if we have nowhere to live? And they're constantly kind of raising the alarm on it. And at the same time, the city is also saying, yeah, we're growing. Like, we don't have enough apartments in this city for all of you. What are we supposed to do about that? And at the same time, the university is saying the same thing. They're saying, we're trying to build these dorms. We're trying to get you enough housing. And so this has been an issue that has not only started historically, but has been talked about for a really long time. This has been a pressing concern for not just university related folks, but the city of Madison as a whole.
So the university is having struggles like building enough housing, basically?
One of the most interesting things I learned in the research for this, we talked to Jeff, who is the director of housing, and housing on campus at the university is what's called an auxiliary unit, which means they have to pay all their own bills. So if they spend money on a project, they have to earn enough money to pay that money back. And so we talk about this on the podcast, but it creates this issue where, they want to keep prices affordable and low, and the dorms definitely are affordable in comparison to the rest of the city. But then they also want to make sure that they can kind of pay back their loans and all these things. And so for a long time, pre-Jeff and currently with Jeff as the director, they've wanted to build more dorms. But to be able to do those dorm projects, they need to get approval from the state legislature. Insert spooky sound here. And that has been a real roadblock.
I imagine that's a major roadblock. And I know that was, they're talking about a big item was an engineering building and how big of a deal that was and like the state budget and the deal for the university. So I can only imagine getting other sorts of projects off the ground is really big. You talked about that discrimination was something that you looked into. How does that come into a historical lens for UW on housing from yesteryear to today?
Yeah, when you look at the mid-century, that's when you have some of the worst, kind of vilest forms of housing discrimination. And the way we talk about it in the episode, which is episode 3, is that, if you are just an average white student who is at UW-Madison in the 1950s, it's really hard to find housing. It's very complicated. There's, not enough houses. They're expensive. You have kind of landlords to deal with. There are these issues. Now, if you are a student who is Black, those issues are compounded because there are landlords who refuse to house you because you are Black, because housing discrimination is completely legal at this time. And so if a landlord says, I do not want a Black tenant, there is nobody to say that is illegal. They are allowed to discriminate. And so you see a lot of discrimination against students of color. You see a lot of discrimination against Jewish students. And to compound those problems even further, international students are facing the same issues, right? They're being discriminated against. And the dorms have to prioritize Wisconsin students, in-state students. So there's a law in the mid-century that they have to prioritize housing Wisconsin state students. So it's hard if you're a white student, it's hard if you're a student of color, and it's even harder if you're an international student because you're facing all of these additional boundaries. And so, we realized that the housing problem is just this kind of base layer of the cake, and then all of these other issues are kind of just added on layer by layer.
Well, in episode 5, you all dig into the issue of students facing homelessness, and I want to play a moment from that episode now.
The costs catch up to these students pretty quickly. Compounding over time, it's no wonder students end up with little to no options.
So what do these students do?
Sarah Goldrick-Robb says for many students, dealing with homelessness means hiding it.
The majority of college students in this country who are homeless are couch surfing. Most of them do not have a mental illness that would play itself out like we see on the street, although certainly some. But, this is why it means that students, particularly those at Madison, talk to me so much about their attempts to pass, to do the things that would help hide the homelessness.
It's so gutting to hear that reality. And I do think it is something that does hide in the shadows because of what we just heard. In that episode, you spoke with higher ed researcher Sarah Goldrick-Robb, who was just speaking, who focuses on equity. And I'm curious, what can you share about the current state of homelessness for UW-Madison students and, what you learned in pulling together that episode?
It's actually my favorite episode in the season, and I keep telling people if there's only one episode that you listen to, I want it to be that episode, because I think that we have, as society and as the city of Madison, we have a lot of notions and preconceptions about who we think is homeless and why. And so the episode is just as much about talking about students who face homelessness as it is about kind of confronting, I think, a lot of the biases and misconceptions that people have about people experiencing homelessness. And so in that episode, we talk about a lot of the kind of the bias that people have against homeless people and what the image of a homeless person is and why they're homeless, and also the image of a UW-Madison student and who that person is, right? A UW-Madison student, is wearing their Badger sweatshirt, they're going to football games, maybe, they're having a beer at Bratz on State Street. They're not homeless. That's not the image we have of our students, but it's the reality. We have students who are unhoused. We have students who do not have a place to sleep. And so we really wanted to tackle a lot of the bias that people have against homeless people and against the issue of people facing homelessness, while also, really, I think, bringing a lot of attention that this is a problem on campus. And it's a problem that's really uncomfortable, I think, for the university to address, but also for us as like faculty, staff, and students, right? We don't want to believe that our students are facing homelessness, but they are.
Guess what? CityCast has some news. I'm Sean McPherson, the host of CityCast Twin Cities.
And I'm Jane Sihu, and I'm the host of CityCast Seattle. Hey, if you have a friend in one of our cities, can you text them for us?
Yeah, something, simple like, hey, how's that rash doing? And do you listen to podcasts? Because I have one you're definitely going to like. After that, tell them that CityCast has helped you become more informed, more involved, and more connected to your amazing city.
We're going to help that person in Seattle who's been trying to make friends.
And we're also going to do that for that guy you only kind of knew in college who moved back to the Twin Cities after graduation.
Don't we all have that guy?
Yeah, and usually that guy is named Todd.
So did you text them yet?
Jane, let's just wait a minute. We don't want to rush anybody. We'll do a little small talk. How's everything going in Seattle?
Beautiful, beautiful. Fall leaves popping. How about Twin Cities?
Today, beautiful and sunshiny in St. Paul. Okay, Jane, I bet they are done texting by now, and I just want to remind them, hey, you, please tell that friend to subscribe to CityCast Twin Cities or Seattle, wherever you get your podcasts.
Or if you don't want to text them and you're really just on Instagram sending them DMs all the time with like funny videos, send them a DM of our latest videos. You can find us at CityCast Twin Cities or CityCast Seattle on Instagram. Thanks.
Yeah, I can't help but think of the reflections. Obviously, UW-Madison is a huge part of the city and a huge part of the city population-wise. And to hear like all of these reflections of what's happening there is, the same things are happening in Madison. I'm curious, how much of a microcosm of what's happening over at the university is happening in the greater Madison area.
Yeah, I think whatever is happening on campus, the reason that we focused on students is because obviously we're a university history project, right? So we have all this kind of access to university history, and a lot of that history is focused on students. But we also felt it was kind of manageable to say, all right, we're going to look at this group that is having problems with housing in Madison. But in reality, everyone is having these problems if you're trying to find a house in Madison. So whether you're a renter who's looking for a new apartment or whether you're trying to buy a house, you're going to find that it's really expensive to live in this beautiful city. That is a problem that everyone faces. You're going to find that there's a shortage, and that shortage of housing leads to more expenses, right? This is a more expensive city to live in. So whether you're a student or faculty, staff, or somebody who has no connection to the university, you are going to find housing problems in Madison because it is a citywide problem. And so our goal was to really kind of maybe use students and that issue because it's so public, and, people keep saying, oh, the high rise is downtown. Oh, they're constantly building. It's a very visible problem to really say, yeah, okay, it is. And also you're missing this huge piece of the story about why this is happening.
And it can be really jarring, right? And I think, talking about the high rises, it would be one thing if the high rises were for everyone, but these are really a lot of luxury high rises that I know I would never have been able to afford as a student, the ones that are on campus and close to campus, and the high rises, across the city that other non-student residents would be looking at. But where do those come into the conversation? Are they easing the campus's housing shortage at all, or is it kind of more so further adding to the affordability crisis?
I think it's really hard because in some situations, yes, they are easing the burden. There are absolutely students who can afford these luxury apartments, whether that's like family means, whether they're taking out more loans. There are students moving into those buildings. And the idea has always been, whether it's university housing or any other type of housing, that if you just build the houses, it will all trickle down, right? So some people will move into the luxury, then these other apartments down and down and down will be open and available. The problem is trickle-down housing doesn't work. There are lots of studies that show that trickle-down housing doesn't work because what happens is landlords are all raising their rents because of this. So if they see someone charging more, they think they can also charge more. And there's been recent studies that show that a lot of landlords are using the same system, the same algorithmic system to determine rents. So if one apartment raises their rent, the rest of the apartments in the area will raise their rents as well. And so it is solving a crisis in that you have more units, but it is also making everything more expensive. And this idea of trickle-down housing, that somehow if you build enough luxury, it will get cheaper at the bottom, is not holding true.
So is the university seeing more students reporting homelessness? I mean, do you have any data around that and the consequences of this sort of like larger crisis in our city and how it's impacting UW?
I think because it's such a difficult topic and it's such a taboo topic, and it's hard for the university to have this image of a student and then to think about that student also being homeless, there hasn't been as much study around it as there should be. So I can't tell you, this number of students are homeless at UW. But we were really excited to interview Casey Strahl on the show because, part of her role at the university is thinking about basic needs for students. And so when she got into that role, one of the first things they did was a study, and she shared on the pod that, 28% of the survey respondents indicated that they had a rent increase that made it difficult for them to pay for housing in the previous 12 months. Right. So, I mean, if you think about that, 28%, if you have a lecture hall full of 100 students, that's 30 students who in the past year have struggled to pay rent. And your options if you struggle to pay rent are you can, not live somewhere. As Sarah Goldrick-Robb talked about, you can couch surf, you can be homeless, you can try and sleep in the library, or you can drop out of school and you can leave the university. And we don't have good data on who drops out for financial reasons either, but we have plenty of stories, and we shared some of those stories on the podcast as well, because if you don't have a place to live here, you cannot keep going to school here. And so, one of the bigger, I think, kind of metaphorical questions for the university is, how does having such a difficult housing landscape affect the university's mission, right? Because at a certain point, if students can't afford to live here, they can't go to school here, then what are we here for, right? Will the university be able to serve its mission of educating the next generation?
And some of the next generation that will become just Madison residents and who are no longer students and contributing to the city. This is so on my mind and on so many folks' minds in Madison. But what does a city and, the university being a part of that lose when its lower and middle income residents can't afford to attend its universities or afford to live in the city?
Oh, Bianca, I think about this all the time. This is my soapbox plea to the average Madison resident who maybe has a nice apartment or has a nice house. That's great. That's wonderful. But if we lose low to middle income people in our city, we are going to lose a lot. We're going to lose wonderful baristas, wonderful chefs and sous chefs and line cooks. We're going to lose wonderful artists, right? People who make the art you love, who do the opera that you love, the performances that you love, the theater that you love. These are people who, have these jobs and these kind of beautiful things that they provide to our city that make our city a vibrant, cultural, wonderful place to live. And if they can't live here, they will move away. They will not be able to live here. And our city will suffer the consequences of that. In an ideal utopic city, you want people of kind of all income stratospheres here so that we have that vibrant, eclectic city. And so when people say, oh, it doesn't affect me, I bought my house on the east side 20 years ago, or I have an apartment I've been living in for the past 5 years, it might not seem like it's affecting you, but it is. It is absolutely affecting you.
With all of the research you did for this podcast and your team did for this podcast, have you guys come to some solutions or, that might be able to help this affordability crisis. I was just talking to some creatives recently. It's like, New York City has rent control. Like, what could Madison do? What could the university do? Has there been anything successful done in the past that we're just like sleeping on? Or what sort of conclusions have you guys drawn if you were to offer any solutions to like campus leaders or the rest of us out here in the city for better ways to address the housing issues plaguing us?
Yeah, the end of the podcast, I feel like the spoiler alert is that, people sometimes come to a podcast thinking, ooh, they're going to give me the answer. They're going to give me the solution. The history is very complex. The problem is very complex. And so I think the solutions will have to be complex as well. It's not just a one policy fixes all, right? So rent control, rent stabilization is something that I believe the city should consider. But as of right now, it's illegal in the state of Wisconsin for that to happen. So even if Madison passed a law for rent control or rent stabilization, it is illegal in the state of Wisconsin for that to happen. So there are other, we could try and repeal that state law and then we could have rent control or rent stabilization. But it's also thinking about zoning laws, right? How are we zoning single family versus multifamily neighborhoods? How are we working with housing developers? Because at the end of the day, housing development is not an altruistic field. We live under capitalism. And so it needs to be a good deal for the housing developers, but it also needs to be a good deal for our students and our residents. And so we're going to have to think about all of the different problems that create housing inaffordability to be able to start solving pieces of them.
Well, it's so good to have another season of reorientation out for folks to dig into and better understand such an important issue that our city's talking about. Casey, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and break down this history on such a relevant issue.
Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of CityCast, and so we really appreciate it. And I hope you all will listen to Reorientation.
That's Casey Lucchini Butcher, director of the Rebecca M. Blank Center for Campus History and co-host of the Reorientation podcast. You can listen to Reorientation wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll also have a link to it in our show notes. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with someone whose rent is too damn high, or about to be? Help spread the word about CityCast Madison. All right, y'all, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care, and thanks for listening.
That was a great outro.